Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years. My name is Pye.
I'm Dr. Glen.
Dr. Glen.
Yes.
Today's episode is titled Traditional Couples Therapy is Bullshit. How does that make you feel?
A little uncomfortable.
I feel
like I'm backstabbing the profession a little bit. You know, I always say like, don't backstab, stab in the front.
Stab in the front. It's much better.
Yeah, it's much better. At least they can see it, right? But I mean, one disclaimer, we're not saying like it's all terrible, but we're saying like there's improvements that need to be made.
For sure.
Yes.
It is a bold title. I think it's completely justified. We probably stand on similar, but I'm definitely on the more extreme side when it comes to this. But I would acknowledge, and I do want to say that there's therapy in and of itself, especially from an individual level, dealing with trauma, dealing with symptoms, that kind of stuff is very important.
Yes.
And it's not to say that that is complete bullshit. What I'm more so saying, and this was my title choice. You can just put it on me, dude. Just be like, that was Pye who decided.
Pye said so.
Pye said this.
That'll be a part of the title. Yeah.
Pye said this. So my thing is more so from all the research that I've done in the past, I found traditional couples therapy, not therapy, but couples therapy, to be highly ineffective. And the crazy part about this is that there's some research on this, there's some articles and some publications, but they get pulled down quickly. Like the industry's trying to prevent, we caught one actually on HuffPost and then it was removed later on, right?
Yeah, because there was like 20, there was a quote about 20 to 30% effective rate for couples therapy.
For couples therapy.
And then it got revised because there was like a counter article saying like this wasn't right. And then they adjusted the article after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whenever those kind of articles come out, there's generally this like control the industry wants to control, obviously because everyone's financially driven to make sure that people keep coming back to couples therapy.
Yeah.
But my big thing and in writing the book and that process was like, this is not effective and there has to be a better way. And when we started working together, that was the first thing. So we have a research assistant who is one of your students at the college. And the very first thing that I wanted to do was I want you guys to see what I'm seeing, or I want to know if I'm crazy. I want to know the effectiveness of traditional therapy.
Yeah.
Because from everything that I've read, from my own studies, my own case studies, as well as my own experiences, it's bullshit for 80% of the people that are going to it.
Yeah. So this was actually done by a professor at the school. So her specialty is research. And basically, when we were doing this project, we were like, hey, can you do some research on this?
Yeah.
So she didn't think she was going to find that much. But over like a month and a half, 2-month period, she basically, I have the information here. She looked up 75 scholarly articles, right? And everything was broken down into 2 characteristics: the characteristics of a therapist and then the client barriers in treatment.
Okay.
And we're going to cover those 2 today.
Yeah. And this episode, I think it'd be great to focus on the therapist side.
Yeah.
I think it'd be fun to come back and talk about the barriers that, because there's 2 sides to this coin. And to go back and explain when we first started this conversation, and wait, did you say, is Stacy
she's going to be she's a professor.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So this is actually like, that's her expertise is research.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So she did like hardcore research.
Yeah. So the 3 of us are together. We're downstairs and we're talking, let's put together this research. And I had 2 things. I was like, look, this is what I wrote in my book, is that it's not easy for traditional couples therapy to be effective for multiple reasons. Number 1 is that the couple has to get past like their own kind of ideas of therapy in general, which most people, if you pick 2 people, one of them is probably going to have a negative view on it, if not both of them. Then you have to get them both to be willing and able to go. You have to get them both being wanting to work on the relationship. This is like the precursors leading into this process. Then it gets down to, did they even pick a good therapist? Does the therapist know what they're doing? Do they have a workable framework? Are both people bought into the process? Does the therapist have both people's trust? There are so many barriers to this that from my own research, it was like, this is not effective. But beyond maybe 5 to 10 different sources, I didn't have much more information beyond that other than just statistics, some publications, and that was it. So as we sat downstairs with Stacy, it was like, let's see what we can find.
Yeah, and she found a lot. So
I was kind of scared, to be honest, because in my head, I'm like, what if I'm the crazy one? You know, you always have those, what if I'm the crazy one here?
That's a conversation after this podcast's over.
Maybe.
Just kidding.
Maybe I'm still the crazy one. I mean, this did end up being titled this, and you know, you've been doing therapy for 20 years.
No, I agree. So, I mean, it was eye-opening, and it was interesting. So
okay, so tell me what you saw first when this thing came back. So you said 75
research articles that was done based on couples counseling and its effectiveness. And then once again, it was broken. So one of the categories was therapist characteristics. So, you know, what are the characteristics of a therapist when you see a person for couples therapy? So there's basically 7 things that came out.
Can you give a summary of those findings? Like in general, what did Stacy come back with in these findings?
So in general, basically what it came down to is that most therapists, they don't use a model at all. So like in terms of a therapy framework for couples therapy, most therapists do not use any model whatsoever.
I wrote this, but I'm still surprised hearing it.
Yeah. So that was a big one. That was a big one, right? The second overarching point is that most of the therapy, the majority of the therapy, when you see a couple, like a therapist for couples therapy, is it's opinion based. It's solely based on the opinion of the therapist.
This is okay. I guess it's one thing to have written it in my book, but it's another to like hear you actually bringing it up. So in summary, by and large, before we get into the individual points, because I want to get into all those points, but in summary, are we right in saying that traditional therapy is largely ineffective?
It is. And it's not discounting the people that are effective and that they're doing a good job, but in general, it isn't. It's not effective unless you have a person, based on these studies, unless you have a person that has good opinions, has a healthy relationship dynamic themselves, and can kind of talk you through things through their own education and smarts, then it can work out. But in terms of just, you know, research in general, it's basically saying like you're rolling the dice.
Yeah.
Like you're basically rolling the dice, and then if they're not really using a model, it's basically like, oh, I like this person. I can relate to this person. It becomes more like a friendship, a pseudo friendship therapist relationship, but they're dictating everything that you guys are doing, which is kind of scary.
And to your point, that you mentioned that you know, we're going to talk about the therapist barriers, right? But like we said earlier, there's all the other barriers that have to be, these other hurdles that have to be overcome for this to be effective. And for each of those to line up, it just doesn't happen. And we had estimated previously that conservatively, traditional therapy was effective 20 to 30% of the time. And I said, when that number to me is conservative, I said, if I were to guess, I would say that traditional therapy works 5 to 10% of the time. And we just don't have numbers on the times that it doesn't.
No, agreed. And then when you look at like higher statistics about how effective it is, and it's like north of 50%, you know, once again, you can argue that that's symptom management. It's just there's a reduction in symptoms, but then if they're continuously going for years, how much better are they actually getting? Yeah.
Okay, so let's start going over the findings. Now, we have 7 different points that we're going to go through. For a general note, Stacy used, these are all academic sources, right?
These are not peer-reviewed articles.
Correct. So this isn't, you know, Googling stuff. This is like off of academic journals. I want to be clear, because when people say research these days, I feel like they use that word so
loosely.
Yes, it means Googling.
Yeah.
I research something. That means you type something into Google.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Google machine does not get you good results a lot of times. So
yeah. And then, you saw the charts and the graphs
Yeah, it was intense.
and the categories. Like there was a lot of work put into this. And then once again, like she didn't have like one opinion one way or the other. So it wasn't like she was trying to prove this to be the case. She was like, I'm just going to research it, be objective.
Yeah.
And then I'll give you guys the results.
That's part of what was like worrying me was there is no confirmation bias in this process.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's like, Stacy, take our side.
I might be the crazy person. Okay. Okay. So point number one.
So point number one, training and resources for couples treatment fall short. So we kind of talked about this in other podcasts, but then like even like when you're trained and you go to school, it's not like you're getting intense training on how to treat couples, how to make them better, and you go through this systematic process. Like everything is kind of generic.
Yeah.
You're learning all these different modalities. So the training in general just falls short, and more work needs to be done in this area.
Yeah, and that makes sense because when you are studying psychology, you're studying psychology as a field. And what you're getting when you specialize in couples therapy might be a few extra classes. But we're talking like,
Yeah.
how do you go from that? When I graduated in accounting, this is a 4-year program. I graduated in accounting. And when I got my accounting job, it had nothing to do with what I learned.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a more generalist approach, like basic knowledge, but then you get that piece of paper,
Yeah.
and then you just have to learn the job all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other side to this too is that unlike accounting, relationship therapy is this is a infant of a field. Like this has been around 100 years? How many years has relationship therapy been around?
That I don't know, but it can't be more than 200 years.
It began with Freud,
Yeah.
right? And that was individualistic psychology.
Correct. But
And
yeah,
then when was relationship therapy in?
that I can't, but let's just say it's fairly new. I can't give you a number. I don't know the exact number, but it's fairly new.
So compared to any other profession that's been around
All right.
thousands of years,
Yeah.
we're talking something that's in its infancy.
Absolutely.
We're barely beginning to understand. So putting that into perspective on top of the fact that you don't have enough training and resources going into it.
Yeah. Agreed. And definitely more training and resources are needed.
Okay.
So that was point number one. Point number two, therapists do not really use a guided framework and just focus on what they think is right and wrong.
I'm going to say I told you so.
Yeah, so that is a big one. And then this is like some sub points is basically what they found is that beyond like some cognitive reframing, like you go to a therapy session, like you hurt me, and then they reframe it.
Yeah.
What you did had my feelings hurt. So that's kind of the reframe. Like you take ownership, right? And then like some logic. Aside from like basic reframing, there is no guided framework, and it's solely based on the opinion of the therapist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So from my own personal experience, because
Yeah.
I can't, I've done hundreds of case studies, but I can't speak on behalf of the people that went through the case studies and went to their therapist and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm going to speak from my own perspective. When my ex and I were going through that process, and it was mostly me going through that process for 14 years, every single person I met with did something completely different.
Yeah.
It was like half the time we'd be focusing on the way that we communicate, or the way that I would communicate, or the way that I would, interpret things. And because she wasn't there as well for the majority of these, it was very individualistic and whatnot, but there wasn't a single process across the board. Not once did I go to another therapist and like, oh yeah, I've done the same thing with this other person. It was everyone's unique take on it. The only spin on it, the only difference to me from what they were saying, and we're talking over 14 years, I'm talking like 30 counselors, okay? 30, maybe 40, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
The only difference in what they were saying versus what my friends and like random people and random advice was the ability to be able to use psychological terms in discussing the concepts. So they would say, oh yeah, so this is, this type of bias, or this is, something from your past that's affecting you currently, or this is, they would be able to explain it slightly better, but in the end, it was the exact same advice.
And you bring up a really good point. So like, for example, like individual therapy, like if you do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that it may be a little bit nuanced or different upon, upon the therapist that use it, but you would understand that it's being used. If you experience it with one therapist, you're going to experience it with another.
Yeah.
Couples therapy, you're right. Like it's the roll of the dice because everyone has different opinions.
Correct.
There is no guided framework. So you don't even know what you're going to get.
Yeah. And this is also why the field of therapy and psychology from an individual perspective is much more reliable and it's much more effective than from a couple's perspective, because there was no underlying roadmap of like how a relationship should function. So everyone's just going to use their own 2 cents on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had my therapist say, well, this is what me and my husband do. Well, this is what me and my wife do in this situation. And I'm like, I don't really need to know what you guys do. I want to know, like, what does the research show that we should do, and what does that do? But they speak from those very personalized anecdotal experiences in a way that was surprising to me.
Yeah. And to be honest, like it made me cringe because I would look back at my own experiences and a lot of it was opinion based depending upon where I was in my stage of life and marriage as well. So it made me cringe.
And that basically means, as a therapist, that the therapist is able to help only the people that they can directly relate to that are in a similar situation.
And that's why like in couples therapy, when people are like, oh, this person can relate to me. Yeah. Because they're going through similar things.
Yeah.
Based on this research, because there's just similarity based on opinions and viewpoints.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was number 2. Number 3, therapists do not use evidence-based practices. Right. So,
interesting.
So they don't use any models that are evidence-based in couples therapy for the most part at all. Right. Yeah. And then some subpoints, the research found that the more experienced you are, the less likely you will use a newer therapy model.
Interesting.
Right. So the more like older you get, the more seasoned you are in the field.
Yeah.
You're going to be like, I'm not going to use that. Or there's, new therapies are coming out. They're going to be like, I'm not using that. I'm just going to stick to what I know.
That goes directly to my point of when I told you, I said it, I said this over dinner. I said it to you, I think a few times, but over dinner, I said, it is to me incredibly unique that someone with your caliber of knowledge and experience, 20 years in this, was willing to read my book and to say, there's something here that we can use to change the way that we do things, because that's unusual.
Well, pain is a motivator, man. So
sure. But to that point, what I'm saying is like, I couldn't get anybody academically to give this a shot.
No, I appreciate that. But like I said, it spoke to you, like in what you did, because I was like, man, this is really well researched. This is actually really cool.
Yeah.
So,
but to that point, there are very few people with your level of experience that would actually try a new model, or especially one that came from a wedding photographer.
I appreciate the compliment. Another sub point to this is the therapy. It moves into, and then this is the quote, talking to a good friend space of treatment. Right. Okay. So like you go to that, and you hear that a lot, right?
Yeah.
That therapist, they know me. They're like a friend to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so there is no evidence-based treatment other than it feels like a friendship.
Yeah.
Anthony, we're talking about that a little bit before the podcast came on, because it becomes this friendship type dynamic.
And that's where you get the symptom management approach, because it's cathartic to talk about what's going on, So this is where, to me, the value in couples therapy, by and large, was just cathartic to say, I feel a little better. I vented. But it never addressed the underlying issues, which meant that the therapy was only effective as long as you were going. And it was only effective to the extent of managing your emotions, not ever getting to underlying core issues.
Yeah, because the whole business model is to keep you coming back, right? Like you take medications for a long period of time. Therapy is to keep you coming back over and over and over again.
It's one of the most beautiful subscription models I can think of. I mean, you're paying $250, $300 per visit. What, twice, 4 times a month?
Yeah, and it adds up.
Yeah.
It gets very expensive.
Crazy. Okay.
All right, the next one. Therapists do not create real symmetry with couples. And so,
what's that mean?
So sub point is like, instead of creating a dynamic where both people feel heard. There's something known as healthy triangulation, where people, you, the therapist, you're objective and you're creating this healthy triangle where people can share and resolve conflict. It kind of goes off the rails and they'll pick a side. So eventually the therapist will begin to lead and pick a side based on their own personal feelings and opinions. So if you kind of look at the common theme here, in the first 4 points, is it's all opinion based on the opinion of the therapist.
Yeah. Can I tell you a story about that one?
Yes, please.
So when my ex and I went to therapy, it was only after I said, I want a divorce. I'm done. That was the point that she agreed to go see a counselor. So 2 weeks after I said that, she came and said, let's go and try this. And I thought, it's the one thing we haven't done is go together. Yeah. So why not give this a shot? So I said, I'm going to do this I kind of said, give myself 4 months doing this. Let's see how this goes. And that exact thing that you just described was so clearly visible. It led right up to the point where I stood up in the very last meeting and I said, this is complete horseshit and I'm done. And I'm filing divorce in front of the therapist. Because what basically happened was, first, my ex chose a therapist that she trusted, which was fine. I was like, whatever, let's pick the person that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So it was a woman, and we sit down with this therapist, and the initial meetings are it's a lot of me explaining, like, I don't understand what's happening. I don't even understand the nature of a healthy relationship. I don't know what we should be doing. I just know that I don't feel connected. I don't want to be with this person. I don't even respect this person. And she said, well, that's a problem, because if you have contempt, then it's like she was spouting Gottman. And this is the weird part about this, is being on the other side of this. I'm sorry, miss, but I've read every goddamn book that you have. So for you to sit there and be like, well, I see contempt in you. I'm like, no shit, Sherlock, dude. I see the same thing in me.
Yeah.
Help me to fix it. Help me understand why this is happening.
Yeah.
And I would actually call it. I was like, oh yeah, that's from Gottman, right? And she'd like, yeah, that is.
The 4 horsemen.
Yeah, that's the 4 horsemen.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so how do I deal with that? One session after the next.
All right.
My ex would stay very quiet. She would kind of stonewall, stay quiet in these sessions. And after I would say something like, this is something that's going on. Here's one example. Here's this that's going on. And she would say, I just don't understand why he sees a problem in this. I don't understand what he's talking about. And by about the 5th, 6th session, she continues this, where it's like, I would come and lay out this series of things. Okay, this was the homework that you gave us, but here's my piece. But she still didn't do her side of this. Okay, so I still don't feel a connection. I still don't feel like I respect this person next to me. And these are the issues that are happening. And then it was in that last session where my ex goes, see, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You've listened to it now for 6 sessions. These are just all his problems. He's the only one that comes here. I feel like the marriage is perfect. She literally said this. Yeah. And my eyes are like wide. Like, am I in like some fucking crazy Twilight Zone moment? But she's like, this marriage is perfect for me. And I have everything that I want. I just don't know why he's so ungrateful and unappreciative and all these things. And I'm looking at the therapist like, are you picking up on what's happening right now? I'm picking up on what's happening right now. The therapist looks at my ex, looks back at me, looks at my ex and goes, I see it. You're right. He's unhappy and these are his personal issues. And I was blown away.
Yeah.
For another person to like sit there and to then come to this place 6 weeks in where she's agreeing with my ex.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here going, nothing is happening. She's not doing anything.
Yeah.
She's coming in and she's playing this victim card beautifully.
Yeah.
And that's when I stood up and I go, you don't know what you're talking about, to the therapist. You don't know what you're talking about and you don't know what you're doing. This process is complete horseshit. Yeah. And I'm done.
Yeah.
And I just walked out.
Yeah. And I don't blame you. I mean, besides the symmetry, like, this is, I think this is going to be another topic, but one of the client barriers is it promotes toxic behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
It actually promotes it promotes someone that's like a very toxic or borderline abusive human being to manipulate a therapy session.
It promotes gaslighting.
Yeah.
That's exactly what was
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
And if you're listening and going, what is gaslighting? Well, it's exactly what I described. It's I'm not the person that has the problem here. They are. Even though in reality it's reversed, it's the other person making you feel like you're the problem.
Right.
When in reality they are. This is gaslighting somebody.
Yeah. And then once again, it goes back into that symptom management model. You're not acting appropriately. Instead of like validating your contempt or your frustrations or trying to get your side and point of view, they can't branch outside of being rational. You're
Correct.
being irrational.
Correct.
You are being irrational.
I was framed
You're
as
acting
like
out of control.
Exactly.
And so she's able to behave in this framework, this space. You're not. You're the crazy one.
Yes.
Yes.
Precisely. The way that I would react to it was see, this is my point. This is what's happening. This is his problem.
Yeah.
And then I like the fact that I watched a doctor of psychology
Yeah.
be convinced of this. It blew my mind. I wanted to take her degrees and tear them off the walls.
Yeah.
And be like, you don't deserve any of this.
That must have hurt too, like deep down. Besides just being angry, that must have hurt.
I think anger was the biggest piece. That I don't know that there's a worse feeling for a person than being gaslit. Just because you are beating yourself up nonstop of like, is this my issue? And I'd been doing it for 14 years. So it wasn't the first person. So way back, like 7 years prior to that, my ex had gotten someone else, a religious counselor, to actually do the same thing. And that person said, this is your fault. You're the one that needs to address this. And having children is going to be the first step toward the right place. And they convinced me. I mean, I'm young at this point. I'm 29, 30 years old. I still have no clue what the F is going on. So they convinced me that having kids, and granted, I love my children. My children are incredible. They are the only good thing from my marriage was the birth of my son and my daughter. That's the only good thing that we created together. So I am incredibly grateful for that. But to think that that would fix your issues is insane. It covers them up for a little bit.
It's ridiculous because you're just adding on more pressure and responsibility when you're still trying to figure yourself out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when that counselor did that 14 years, and at that point I had all the research and I'd been reading since I was 21 years old on this subject, right? But at that point I began to see that I'm not the crazy person. I'm not the one that is in the wrong right now. The only thing I felt was anger, because then it was another person again trying to convince me that I'm the problem and I was being gaslit.
Yeah.
So there was no hurt at that point. The hurt was 7 years prior.
I don't blame you for saying that. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you, but I don't blame you for like being that upset and just storming out and saying, I'm done with this.
Yeah. At a certain point, it's just like, this isn't going to go anywhere. Yeah. And funny thing is I'm dumb enough that took me 14 years, but that's what I thought of when you brought up the idea of symmetry.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to transition now because I don't know how to.
Because that was hardcore.
I don't know how to transition. I don't know how to bridge that, but I'm just going to.
That was great. That was a great transition right there.
I appreciate that.
Just be like, this is thoroughly uncomfortable now. Yeah. Let's go on to the next point.
Okay. Number 5, therapists do not have a set definition of intimacy and how to conceptualize it. So like they have a difficult subpoint. They have a difficult time defining what a successful relationship is. And then the couples will assume the therapist knows, but it is solely based on their opinion. So once again, it's opinion based, but they have a difficult time defining what a successful relationship is.
Glenn?
Yes.
What's the one question that I tried to answer with my book?
What is a successful relationship and what does it look like?
Yes.
Yes.
That was the single question, and I've said it many times.
Yeah.
I would ask every therapist, just tell me what a healthy relationship looks like. I cannot express to you just how vindicated I feel right now.
It shows on your face. I'm not gonna lie, man.
Does it show on my face? Is it like there's like a smug?
There's like a relief. There's just like, it's almost like you say, I told you, man. You're looking at me this way. I'm like, yeah, I feel
But
it,
it's
bro.
not you, because you believe me from the beginning.
But no, I feel it, bro. Like I could see it in your eyes. There's a sense of like, yeah, you should puff out your chest a little bit more, and you should, because you've been saying this for a long time.
Yeah. You're the outlet for this sense, but this is the sense that I just want to scream to like the world. I want to shout it in the face of every therapist, in the face of every single one of these people that I'd met with, and be like, mother, I don't even have the words, dude. The words is going to be a string of expletives that I probably.
But your face says it. Like even if you don't even say anything, like it shows, man. It shows. Good.
Read my face right now. Yes.
You are validated, my friend. You are validated.
Okay.
See, another bridge I don't know how to transition after that. But
no, keep going. You were going to keep going in that point, that along that vein though you had. That was number 6, right?
That was number 5. We still have 2 more to go.
Good. Okay. So number 5 was that most therapists couldn't define what a healthy relationship looks like.
And then once again, it's solely based on their opinion.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So number 6, therapists will often overvalue how much progress the couple is making. So in their eyes, they will look and be like, man, they're making so much progress because of the work that's being done in here. Where in truth, the progress is minimal.
Yeah.
So like they often overvalue their influence in terms of what's taking place.
That's
and then
interesting.
the other sub point is a bad therapist can ruin a marriage or a relationship, which is very serious. You go to someone that has no idea what they're doing, that could end your relationship for sure. Yeah.
I wrote that.
Yeah.
I wrote that, believing in bad advice will take you to the end 10 times faster.
Yeah. Yeah. So you go to someone toxic because it's very opinion driven, and they can take you to some toxic places.
But that's the whole danger of hanging a doctorate degree on your wall and believing that this is the one way to get somewhere, and not accepting the research and the information and the studies and the new framework, the new education. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's an incredible danger in that. Yeah. Because people believe it. They believe what's hanging on the wall. They believe that doctorate degree certifies you to do this. And so you tell them something that is categorically wrong, and you're going to wreck an entire marriage because they're going to believe it and they're going to go walk away and do it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was when my friend was going through, they were on the verge of divorce and they went to see a couples therapist. I think I told this story. And then basically the guy said, use that anger, fight it out so that it'll lead to passionate sex.
Oh yeah. That's a great idea.
Yeah. And then he was like,
look at Anthony's face right now. That's a face that says it all.
He literally he was like, I can't believe it. And then they were like so desperate. They're like, try, but they just fought more. Who wants to have sex when you're mad at your partner like that? Right. So it didn't work out. It didn't lead to tantric sex because he said that the tantric sex will take away the resentment. You're going to transfer from anger to passion. You'll figure it out.
This insanity.
But that was their doctor.
That I don't have words for that.
Yeah. See, now you know how I feel sometimes, like in these moments of transition, because it's like, whoa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's another moment of transition.
That's exactly right. Exactly. Right. So yeah, it's just, like I said, a lot of the stuff that, the common theme here is it's very opinion driven.
Yeah.
Which is kind of scary.
It's opinion driven with better vocabulary.
Yeah. Better vocabulary and then no guided framework or limited guided frameworks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the last point, the power and influence of the therapist is too high and dangerous. Right. So like if you're overvaluing the opinion of the therapist and you're giving so much respect away and you're like, this is the be all end all, that is not healthy at all.
Yeah.
Right. Because it needs to be a dynamic of trust. It needs to be like respect has to be earned. Right. And ultimately the couple needs to do the work instead of like this person has all the answers. It's through the process they figure out the answers themselves.
And I've heard things like that a lot. So in case studies, I would hear when I would meet with, couples, one of them would say like, oh yeah, well, we got to do this because this is what I read. This is what it said in love languages. So we got to do this.
Yeah.
And you would hear them reference therapists and authors and almost like in a deferential way that was their opinions and their statements were everything.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing too, is, I mean, what this was referencing as well is people will go to treatment with the state of dependency, right? So like if you're in the state of dependency, you're going to believe what anybody tells you that's supposedly an authority figure, versus you're going because you're trying to seek the answers yourself and you're going to work it out with this person that you're going to. That's a huge distinction.
Yeah.
So when you're overvaluing someone, it's almost like a messiah worship, like you're seeking a savior to save you versus actually seeking solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my whole solution to this was, number one, answer that GD question. What does a healthy relationship look like?
Yeah.
And it took 500 studies to answer that. And there were 10 components in what became this framework for a healthy relationship. And it was core value focus. So there's 10 pieces of it. It's broken into 2 areas, desire and sustainability. And we'll talk more about this throughout the podcast. But it's that roadmap to understand this is the piece of the relationship that is not functioning as it should. This is the piece that is not functioning as it should. This is what needs to be focused on. This is why you don't feel excitement. This is why you're feeling overwhelmed. But until you have that, you have no concrete reference point to actually understand. You can only guess. Well, if they're fighting, then, we got to talk about how they're fighting. No, we got to talk about why they're fighting.
Exactly.
We got to talk about the underlying values, the underlying things so it's a core value focused approach to this idea of what a healthy relationship should look like. What became super interesting was when you took that and then you blended therapy and trauma therapy specifically into it. Then it became what it became trademarked as, which is core value focused therapy.
Yeah.
And it's a model where, okay, every piece of the relationship is laid out like a puzzle. Anything that's missing can be identified and worked on. And it begins at their core values.
Yes.
And we can sit here and address past trauma. We can come back to the present of what's going on.
Yeah.
We can work backwards and forwards, but inside of a framework.
That's a big word. We use frameworks.
Yeah.
We actually have a framework that we use, and we use it throughout the whole process.
Correct. So the treatment that one person receives, if somebody is certified in CVFT, core value focused therapy, the treatment that we would give to a couple is the exact same treatment that another CVFT certified therapist would give to a couple.
Correct.
And so now you actually get this, and it blows my mind that this didn't exist yet, dude. When I sat here doing this whole thing and I researched like book after book after book after book, everyone had one piece of this puzzle, and everybody focused on that one piece as if it's the only piece.
Right. And then once again, it fixes certain areas, but it doesn't address the core issues, which is the core values of each individual. And once you look at it from that lens, everything looks a lot easier in terms of what the problems are and how to solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well,
do you feel better?
Yeah, dude. I feel.
Was it kind of? It was cathartic, right?
This was extremely cathartic. This was like 15, 16, 17, no, 20 years now.
20 years, man.
20 years now of research and time, and I feel like I'm vindicated.
You are, man.
And it was recorded. That's what makes it even better. Because I can listen back to this and be like, finally.
Whenever you're feeling down, just play this back. Pump up your chest and be like, see, I told you so.
There's no pumping up of anything, bro.
No?
What this feels like is like I've been holding the biggest dump for 20 years and it's now gone. It's released. That was a very disturbing mental image, but
yeah, that's something that's going to stay with me all day.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I'm
Thanks a lot, man.
I'm here to keep it real, guys. And this is the way I keep it real. We bring our, let's just move on.
Yeah, I think so.
Another weird transition.
Yeah, let's just.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode. This was absolutely fascinating to me to go back through and to see everything that Stacy had found and to pull up and and to walk through all of it. I hope you guys listening found this insightful. Those that are listening, if you are wanting to look into core value focused therapy, we do have sessions now available with Dr. Hong. You guys can actually book a 15-minute free consult where he can kind of explain and guide you and your fiance, your spouse, your partner through exactly what it is and what it can do for you. And then we can go from there. And in the meantime, we'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast. And that's it. That's it for me, at least. You got anything?
That's it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
See ya.